Hello again. This is Raymond Posch with a new episode of New Ways of Being. And today I'm going to basically offer a continuation of my last episode. And I hope you find this helpful. Let me see. My last episode I titled, that was episode number 46, We Can Choose Our Grandest Future. And in that episode, I read from the book Conversations with God, Book 4, Awaken the Species by Neale Donald Walsch. And this title, Awaken the Species, right at the beginning of the book, it announces that God announces this is a third invitation to humanity. Awaken the species. And in other Conversations with God books, there were two preceding invitations to humanity. And you will notice that they are stated as invitations to humanity. Back in the Old Testament, there were the Ten Commandments. Well, if we've been paying attention and learning from God's messengers, or from God directly, if you're able to talk with God, you will know that God does not give commandments and never has. That was a misunderstanding. God does not give commandments. God does not issue judgments. Those are not the understanding of a unified, evolving, conscious, good God. And that's what God is. And God is the universe, the living universe. So I'm choosing to call this out because this is important. God, we've had difficulty, I would say, in the whole lifespan of humanity, the history of humanity, of knowing and understanding God and God's intentions and what God would expect of human beings. And so God has sent messengers to help humans understand. And there have been many over the years, and there are still messengers today. Neale Donald Walsch is one, and he has channeled God's messages and published them in the Conversations with God books. And they have been in the form of conversations with God in part. Some of the books were exactly that, and other books from Neale Donald Walsch have been taking the words from God and presenting those ideas in different ways, and Neale's own ideas. But in this book, I've continued to say I think I first started talking about this 3 or 4 years ago in my earlier podcast, Our Spiritual Life. And I said that it was important because it's God's own direct words to us. So I think I'm going to call this episode something like God's guiding words, but this is only a few of the words. And what I pointed out in the last episode is that in this book, Awaken the Species, in chapter 13, God, in previous books, God began talking about highly evolved beings. And he also talks about highly evolved beings in this book, and specifically with the purpose of helping us see how we can evolve and what we can evolve to, and what, begin thinking about what we are being told. And in chapter 13, God spelled out 16 summary statements that are intended to say, and explain, this is the way highly evolved beings behave. And there were 16 points to this in contrast to humans. And so I read those last time in the previous episode. And then in the following chapter, we got into a bit of a subsequent discussion. But I want to continue with the next chapter. I'm going to read from chapters 15 through 17. But let me just begin by referring back, just a moment. I'm going to refer back to the beginning of chapter 14. So 13 spelled out these 16 behaviors of how highly evolved beings behave compared to humans. And in chapter 14, they began talking about this list, and they only talked about the first one from the list. And just let me go back. Neale said, I would love it if you would first offer a short commentary exploring some of the points on that list so that I can know what this all can look like in real terms as I seek to live them and share them in real life. And I've begun to seek to live these and understand, and so that I can share them myself. And these are a big shift. We human beings, humanity needs to awaken and evolve significantly to be the powerful beings that we would like to be, and to get away from the world of humanity that is distressing so many people these days. We see nothing but terrible behavior and war and violence. And so that's what we're doing here. So going back to number 1 from the list. Oh, and God said, I will be happy to. Let's start at the top of the list. Number 1, an awakened species sees the unity of all life and lives into it. Humans in an unawakened state often deny it or ignore it. Highly evolved beings never question that all things are one thing. They know experientially that there is only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. So he goes on further, but that's a summary statement. As I pointed out last time, the one thing is consciousness. God is one consciousness that creates and fills the universe and creates material reality, physical reality. God went on to say, there is only one energy in the universe, one source or force, and this source or force simply mixes up the foundational elements of which it is comprised, adding some and subtracting others, then alters the vibrational frequency of those various combination of elements to generate differing expressions of the essential essence. And God, as I said last time, went on to say the elements of that which the universe is made, the elements are attracted to each other through the conscious choice making of each element, impacted as they are by the combined energy of the essential essence comprising what we will call your soul. And Neale had said at that point, wait a minute, consciousness exists at the elemental level? And God had said, well, of course, what you call the elemental level is consciousness. The most elemental level in the universe we now understand is consciousness. And not just from God telling us here, but from recent science in the last less than 5 years, physicists and cosmologists in particular have learned that consciousness is fundamental in the universe. It is the fundamental element. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 15. And Neale is speaking and says, I really haven't planned this conversation. I'm just noticing that it's going where it's going. I don't want to put off for too long the rest of our deeper exploration of that list you gave us, but this is too fascinating for me to pass up. Can we just look at this briefly? Okay, then. God says, okay, then. Obviously, this could fill an entire book. Oh, let me back up. So in chapter 14, the conversation focused a little bit on metaphysics. And so that's what this is about. So God is saying, okay, then, obviously this could fill an entire book, but here is Metaphysics 101, a short course in ultimate reality. Okay, so it's right here in chapter 15 of this book. As we've noted a while back in this conversation, all elements of life are imbued with what you would call, in your language, intelligence, or awareness of its inherent function. This awareness fills each element to its maximum capacity. That is, every element is imbued with divine intelligence utterly full out from border to border. Indeed, it would not be incorrect to say that the element itself is this intelligence in particle form. Neale. So each element of life, down to the tiniest submolecular particle, is a part of the mind of God. God. With your sense of poetry, that would be how you would put it, and I have no reason to argue with you. Now, the elements of the essential essence are attracted to each other by an aspect or characteristic that you would call, in human terms, common function. That is, they are all trying to do something, and it is the same thing. They are all in action, forever moving, continuously vibrating, but not without purpose. Their purpose is simply to be. They realize that life is movement. If movement ever stops, that which you call life would not exist. And Neale says, life equals motion equals life. And God replies, yes. Now, as to what each element wants to be, that doesn't matter. The individual element does not have a preference in the matter. It simply wants to exist. Its desire is to be. What is called alignment, then, and the subsequent joint or unified action to which you refer is created by the vibrational influence of any force larger than an individual element. It is this way throughout all of nature. The larger the force, the more pull it has on every smaller element within its impact area. So every element within any impact area will fall into alignment with that larger force that is pulling on it. Neale says, "No one has ever said this to me in this way. Why can't this be explained in this simple way to every child?" God replied, "It can. And in the civilizations of highly evolved beings, it is. This awareness is shared with every emerging entity, each of whom is told about the oneness of life and the circle of life. So if you, as creative beings, wish all the elements of life down into the tiniest particle to move in a particular direction, you must create alignment using the force of combined energy focused in a particular way. And thought is that force." Neale, then what creates that focus? How do we cause energy, that is thought, to be focused in a particular way? God, desire. Desire exists in the soul. It is the soul, let me back up here and make sure I'm being clear on this. Desire exists in the soul. It is the soul, defined in one word. The soul is a local expression of God's desire, which is to experience itself. So in previous books, God talked about that God wants to experience itself through humans and other sentient beings. Desire is the creator of intention. Intention is the creator of thought. Thought is the creator of action. Action is the creator of outcome. So let me repeat this, but just use a little bit different words for you. Desire leads to intention. Intention leads to thought. Thought leads to action. And action leads to outcome of some kind. God goes on. Not all thought, however, is created by the intention arising out of the soul's desire. Thought can also, in a sense, have a mind of its own. That is, the energy impulse that produces a thought can arise out of the body's desires. This produces a different kind of action, which can generate a totally different outcome than the soul had in mind. The soul put its intended outcome in your mind, but your body made you go out of your mind for a moment. This is what happens when you think you are a body, as opposed to knowing that you are a soul. Neale, most of us only hope that we have a soul, or believe that we have a soul, but do not know for sure. But we are sure that we have a body. So this is what most of us think of ourselves as. God. Once again, you're pulling this all together beautifully. That's the way to put the puzzle pieces into place. Now, every element of the essential essence, from the individual soul to every individual energy unit in the body and in the universe, is imbued with desire, which is a particular form or expression of energy in direct proportion to its size. The smallest elements have the smallest desire. Larger elements, which are created by the smallest elements being drawn to them, coalescing and thus producing them, have greater desire. The amount of desire existing within any given element of life will be found to exist in direct proportion to that element's size. Think of desire as the spark plug in the engine of life. Neale. So if what we call God is everything that is, that would make God's desire the biggest desire of all. God, correct. Again, very insightful. And God's desire is that every sentient being, that is, every element of life, large enough and sophisticated or complex enough to reflect self-awareness, has the ability to create its own reality using free will and conscious choice. This is the alchemic way of saying that the foundational elements of life, the tiny individual particles of the essential essence, have no preference in the matter of how the combination of elements align. Your soul, which is a collection of such particles, does have an intention. Your soul is the local presence of the divine intention, which is to express divinity in every element, which is to express divinity in every moment as each sentient being defines it. This being has the freedom to create whatever it chooses, which is godliness in its grandest demonstration. Or to put this all still another way, you all have free will. You will note that I have been saying to you from the very first conversation we ever had that with regard to how your life is lived, God has no preference in the matter. My only desire is that your preference be empowered. Therefore, that which matters, that is, that which you cause to turn from pure energy into solid matter, is up to you, individually and collectively. In making this choice, you can either listen to your body, to your mind, or to your soul. And that is Metaphysics 101, a short course in ultimate reality. And that's the end of chapter 15. And in backing up just a minute, so what God was saying there towards the end is that God would not give us commandments of how to live. God wants us to know that we are part of the divine and to create the life that we would desire. That's what those words were saying. So God would certainly not command us to live in a certain way or tell us what is right or wrong. God would expect us to figure that out, to understand it from our own intelligence that we are given, and then to create the life that we would desire. Let me go on. Chapter 16. Neale, golly, there are so many implications to all this, and I could talk with you about it forever. but I do want to look at some of the other items on that list so that we can know what we're talking about as we seek to rouse ourselves from our long sleep. God, and from your more recent experience of being awake but not knowing it or not acting like it. Neale, yes, and as we then humbly hope to awaken others. Let's move now to item number 2, may we? God, yes, number 2 says, an awakened species tells the truth, always. Humans in an unawakened state too often lie, to themselves as well as others. For instance, you would have a hard time convincing a highly evolved being that the constant stream of sounds and images you place before your offspring in their youngest years has absolutely no effect on their ideas about life, and therefore nothing to do with how your next generation creates its daily experience. You, on the other hand, can't admit that the increasing violence in your society arises, at least in part, from the continual onslaught of such images. Because if you did, you would have to do something about it. And you think there is nothing you can do about it, so it is better to ignore it. Neale, yes, we've talked several times about television programs and movies and video games and internet sites and even children's toys that depict and even encourage our offspring to use as forms of play enactments of violence. Violence, violence at every turn. God. And yet you imagine yourselves to be, or worse yet, allow yourselves to be powerless to do anything about any of this. God, Neale. Some of us do the same thing with tobacco, or a constant diet of unhealthy food, or a lack of exercise, or the societal values that drive our human experience toward constant conflict. God. This business of looking straight at self-damaging behaviors and doing nothing about them is the mark of sentient beings who do not care enough about themselves or do not understand enough about themselves to do enough for themselves to stop the harm they are doing to themselves. Neale, you might expect a 4-year-old child to act like this, but not his 40-year-old parents. So we have to grow up at least a little and see the truth, then speak the truth about what we see. God, that would be a good start, yes. Neale, and highly evolved beings never hide from, always see, and unfailingly tell the truth. God, yes. An awakened species is incapable of lying. Given its combined intention, its members have learned that self-deceit and deceit of others is utterly non-productive, moving them away from, rather than toward, their jointly held desires and intentions. It would be virtually impossible for a highly evolved being to communicate an untruth in any event, because its individual vibration would alter in such a way as to make it apparent that what the entity was communicating was not in sync with what it knows and understands. God, Neale, like when we blush, some of us anyway, if we try to lie. God, very much like that, yes, only at a higher level. The whole entity itself would shake and vibrate at such a variant speed that the truth would literally be shaken out of it. So there would be no point in trying to lie to begin with. Notice that when humans do hold jointly held desires and intentions, they do not lie to each other. Lying is an announcement that you want something other than the person you are lying to. Something Lying is an announcement that you want something other than the person you are lying to. This may seem obvious to you, but what may not be so obvious is how to eliminate this. The end of deceit will come with the end of separation. When your culture and your civilization decides that there really is only one of you in a multiplicity of forms, and therefore only one desire, there will thereafter be only one intention. Neale, and that desire will be God, to reach completion in the expression in every moment of what every living entity desires. Neale, which is God. Once again, as mentioned before, the experience of itself as the only thing it really is, divinity. Or to use the word in your language that was mentioned before, love. The energy that you call love. The unity of the universe is God's expression of divine love for all of life in all of its forms. That's the end of chapter 16. So you will note that, backing up just a little bit, that God said, the end of deceit, which is the foundation of so much non-constructive and destructive behavior, the end of deceit will come with the end of separation. So I have been teaching and saying for many years what has become very obvious is that we need to bring separation, which is the belief that is the foundation of all of our problems. We need to bring that to an end. Out of separation comes fear of every kind. All negative emotions and negative behaviors arise out of fear. And so I have been saying that we need to change from separation and fear to unity and love. Love is the opposite of fear. Unity is the opposite of separation. So, and the important thing about this is that now that science has determined that, and this was after years of study and really trying to figure out the nature of the universe, that they've agreed. And basically, in the period between 2018 and 2022, some physicists were working together to try to come to some answers about the nature of the universe. And they came to realize that they were reaching answers, and they published those answers. And as a result of those being published and reviewed by other scientists, and those scientists had to agree that those conclusions were correct. There were three physicists that were given the Nobel Prize for Physics for discovering that that the so-called quantum principles are applicable at higher scales than the small quantum scale, and in fact at applicable at the scale of the universe as a whole, or at least the whole cosmic reach that science can currently explore. And so I've said, I think in the last two episodes, if not before, and I definitely said it before, in one form or another, but I've been taught how to say it in a more succinct form, that the universe is fundamentally consciousness taking form as matter. It is consciousness that is unified, evolving with purpose, and consciousness exhibits what we would call life. Consciousness is life. So the universe is conscious, living, evolving purposefully. And so we know now that we need to align with the universe, step out of separation and fear into unity and love. All right, let me go on. Chapter 17. Neale, I'd love to hear your commentary on item number 3. God, number 3. An awakened species says one thing and will do what they say. Humans in an unawakened state often say one thing and do another. Human beings also do not always say what they think. For highly evolved beings, not to communicate what they're holding in thought, which is different, by the way, than outright lying, would be seen as a behavior without benefit. What good is holding a thought if it is not expressed? And for highly evolved beings, not to follow through on what they say to each other or to themselves that they will do would be viewed as equally without benefit. Neale, what if the thought I'm holding is not very nice? God, why would you hold a thought that's not very nice? Stop that. Sometimes you'll have a thought that runs through your mind, but you don't have to hold it there. Neale, what if I can't help it? God, I beg your pardon. You imagine that you can't help what you're holding on to? No wonder your species is in such trouble. Neale, yes, I know. And I have changed a lot of the way I think. But still, not every thought that runs through my head is worth sharing with another. God, then don't. Only share the thoughts that you hold on to. By the way, you do know, don't you, that every thought you hold on to is a prayer? That's pretty significant right there. It's saying every thought you hold on to is a direct communication or prayer to God, to the divine, that of which you are part. Neale, no pressure. God, actually, there is none for highly evolved beings. All they do is immediately change their mind if they experience a thought moving through their mind that they don't wish to manifest. If they have any fleeting negative idea at all, they don't give it a second thought. After a while of doing this, they've trained their mind never to consider for more than a nanosecond any thoughts that they do not wish to see begin to take shape in their reality. And this also says to me just how powerful our ability to manifest our thoughts really is. And we don't understand that. We are continuously manifesting stuff that we don't want and then having to, in effect, cancel it and so we're always in a jumbled state of thinking as a result. Let me go on. They just don't hold on to those thoughts. They let them go immediately and move to a new and more positive thought. You might call this a new thought movement, and you could join in groups that choose to engage in this very practice. Neale, yes, you've said that to me before. God, and I'll do so again, no doubt, if it serves the moment at hand. And by the way, I know at least some of you know that this is a reference to a spiritual movement that's called the New Thought movement. But going on, so God says, so keep new thoughts moving through your mind if a passing thought is anything but positive. Then, when the thought you are holding is positive, yes, of course, feel free to share it with anyone who it might concern or who might have a reason to be interested. As for saying one thing and doing what you say, let your word be your bond. And if you don't think you'll be likely or able to do what you're now thinking or saying, don't say it. If, on the other hand, you meant it when you said what you would do, but find later that you really can't because something has happened that has intervened, then go to anyone and everyone to whom you said this thing and clear it up with them. Tell them the truth. Humbly and gently explain why you won't be able to do what you said. Tell the truth to everyone about everything. That's how highly evolved beings live. Neale, I'm seeing that these first few items are related at some level. For instance, item number 4 ties right into this. God, yes, item number 4 says, an awakened species, having seen and acknowledged what is so, will always do what works. Humans in an unawakened state often do the opposite. Neale, this feels a lot like items number 1, number 2, and number 3, only from a different angle. Can you give me some examples of how item number 4 relates to everyday life on Earth so that I can get closer to the impact of this on us? God, certainly. And because these first few items are related, you have already made note of some of this, but let's bring it all together here. If your objective is to live a life of peace, joy, and love, violence does not work. This has already been demonstrated. If your objective is to live a life of good health and great longevity, consuming dead flesh daily, smoking known carcinogens continuously, and drinking gallons of nerve-deadening, brain-frying liquids like alcohol regularly does not work. This has already been demonstrated. If your objective is to raise offspring free of violence and rage, placing them directly in front of vivid depictions of violence and rage during the most impressionable years does not work. This has already been demonstrated. If your objective is to care for Earth and wisely husband her resources, acting as if those resources are limitless does not work. This has already been demonstrated. If your objective is to discover and cultivate a relationship with a loving deity, so that religion can make a difference in the affairs of humans, then teaching of a God of righteousness, punishment, and terrible retribution does not work. This has already been demonstrated. Do you need any more examples? Neale: no, I get the picture. I like the way all of these tie together. I mean, one thing just naturally leads to another. It would be a lot easier for humans to stop saying one thing and doing another if they fix the first tendencies, namely their tendency to see everything and everyone as separate, not unified. Then their tendency to not see what is so, but to ignore it. And finally, their tendency to not tell the truth to everyone about everything. Then they would drop their tendency described in item 3 to say one thing and do another, and could get on with implementing what works, having seen and told the whole truth about what is so. God, wonderfully put, wonderfully summarized. You're really stringing all of this together. Neale: thanks to the clarity with which it's being articulated here, yes. So I really don't need item number 4 explained any further. I get that HEBs, highly evolved beings, from the other dimension see and say what is so. And because they're hiding nothing and hiding from nothing, they do only what works to move forward their unified and identical agenda. God, humans will do the same thing when the species is fully awakened. It can also be one of their stepping stones for getting there. Neale: I am so glad to hear that. That gives me hope, assuming that this awakening is really going to happen. God, you can be among those to help make it happen. That's what the third invitation is all about. And now humanity has the tools with which to create this awakening and the will. Now you have nearly instant worldwide communication and a continually increasing portion of the total population that is self-selecting in their commitment to the process. As you put it earlier, you're just one decision away. That's the end of chapter 17. And I'm sure we're now running along on time. I know some of you would like me to keep going with more items from the list, and perhaps I will do that with the next episode. I've not yet decided about if that's the best use of our time. But repeating from what I said at the beginning of this episode, uh, uh, the whole reason that I'm doing this is that I'm wanting to make it very clear that God has spoken to us through this book and through other messengers and other books like this. And in this one in particular, it was a conversation with God. And I relate so strongly to this because in 2024, I developed the ability myself to have telepathic conversations with God and to have this kind of basically unspoken dialogue that is it's coming into my mind of God speaking to me, and then I speak mentally back to God and have an ongoing conversation. So that's what Neale Donald Walsch did. And so the result is, because he published it in a book, we, the readers of this book, can refer and read this conversation, read what God is teaching through the conversation. And so, what better way to understand what God has to say to humanity? And so, I am reading this information in particular because God is teaching how we can, what is wrong with our current behavior, because currently it's based in separation and fear that leads to all these conflicts, all the desire to lie to one another because we're afraid to speak our truth for whatever reason. It could be out of retaliation or fear of retaliation, or anything. All of our problems arise out of the belief in separation. So this book, by talking specifically about the behaviors of highly evolved beings that have gone through this process of evolving their consciousness, and the result of that, it's helping us see how we can evolve. And that's my reason. I'm not, I understand totally why this is. There's no particular good in blaming all this bad behavior and people until people understand, oh, it comes from this mistaken idea of separation. And so now that we're beginning to understand the nature of the nature, and therefore the nature of ourselves, because we're a part of not only the universe, but the fundamental consciousness of the universe, and that the universe is unified, it is conscious, it is evolving with purpose, then we can align with that. So think about that, take it to heart, give it a lot of thought, and start changing your mind about what you believe. Until next time, you have a great day and a great life.